Sampling and sampling techniques. Our interest in this video is to discuss sampling and sampling techniques in statistics. At the end of this lesson, learners should be able to define sampling, state sampling techniques, differentiate between each sampling techniques. I am Abdullah Okoyemi Falade, your mathematics, statistics, and operation research facilitator. When we choose certain items out of the whole population to analyze the data and draw conclusion thereon, in this case, we refer to as sampling. So sampling is the process of choosing a certain items out of the whole population to analyze this selected data and draw conclusion about the total population. Sampling process comprises several stages, amongst which are: you need to define the population of interest. You need to specify the sampling frame. You need to specify the sampling method of selecting item. You need to determine the sample size. And you need to implement the sampling plan. And lastly, you can now make up the sample, sampling, and data collecting. We have two types of sampling techniques. We have the probability and the non-probability sampling techniques. Under the probability sampling techniques, we have the simple random, we have the stratified sampling, we have the cluster sampling, and we have the systematic sampling. For the non-probability sampling, we have the Quota sampling, we have the accidental sampling, we have the judgmental sampling, and Snowball sampling. What is a sampling techniques that are probabilistic? So the probability sampling techniques is the one in which every unit in the population has a chance greater than 0 of being selected in the sample. So in this case, there is no any biasness because every member has equal chances of being chosen. Under the probability sampling techniques, we have the simple random. When you pick up members aimlessly without any preferential treatment for any member. So the simple random sampling involves common approach to sampling and allows all individuals and subsets to have equal weight or probability of being selected. So in a simple random sampling of a given size, all subsets of the frame are given equal probability. So whenever you hear that, in which sampling techniques do we have equal probability of choosing members? That is simple random sampling. Stratified sampling, from the word stratify, strata. Stratum is singular, strata is plural. So it involves dividing the total population into homogeneous groups, meaning that every group must have uniform and identical properties or features in terms of sex, in terms of ethnic groups, local governments, states, etc. So after you have already divided them into a homogeneous group, you can now start picking at random in each of this group. So that is why it is called stratified sampling techniques. So it also involves random sampling, but the first thing to do is to put them into group, into strata, a strata of homogeneous characteristics. They must have uniform characteristics. You will now pick at random from each of this group. We have the cluster sampling techniques, CST. The cluster sampling techniques is dividing the study population into groups. In this case, we are going to divide them into cluster and drawing a sample of clusters. Sampling is often clustered by geography or by time period that is element in a cluster but not necessarily homogeneous. So the difference between stratified and cluster sampling is in stratified, all the strata must have homogeneous property, but in cluster sampling, it is not necessarily important that the groups, the clusters, are homogeneous. We have the systematic sampling. And systematic sampling is a one to overcome the problem of simple random sampling. Systematic involve you have to start by random sampling. Then you continue with the sampling of every kth element, where k is the population or the sample size. So what do you mean by this? What we mean is you try to have it in such a way that in the population you can have a nomenclature on every list in that population. And from there, you'll be able to make your selection based on the kth elements. Let's say you label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you can decide to pick to sample the evens 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. After you have already done the random sampling. That is why it is stated that systematic sampling begins with random sample, then continues with the sampling of every kth element. So the first thing you need to do in systemic sampling is you have to do a random sampling by picking a particular number of interest. Maybe in a population of 100, you are interested in picking 40. So you pick 40 at random. So out of these 40 now, you will now label them 1 to 40. So if your interest is to pick the even numbers in them, you can now pick it. So it will involve two steps, the random sampling and sampling of the kth element. We have the non-probability sampling techniques. It is the opposite of the probability sampling techniques, in which there is no equal chance of selecting each unit of the sample of the population. The first is quota sampling. Quota sampling is first segmented into mutually exclusive subgroups. Then the judgment is used to select the subject or unit from each segment based on a specified proportion. The problem is that this sample may be biased because not everyone gets a chance of selection. The next one under non-probability sampling techniques is accidental sampling, which is known as GRAP or convenience or opportunity sampling. It's a type of non-probability sampling which involves sample being drawn from the part of the population which is close to hand. Also, we have judgment sampling. It's a method of statistics and quantitative research for non-randomly selecting subjects to study from a population by selecting according to the opinion of an expert. So it is based on judgment. Accidental is a graph based on convenience, based on what is close, what is available, what is accessible. Snowball. It is used by researchers to identify potential subjects in studies where students are hard to locate. So it was also known as chain referral. So just like in COVID-19, when there was a lockdown, in that time, if a researcher intends to collect data and have a sampling techniques in mind, the appropriate sampling at that point could be a snowball, whereby people can refer another people for them to respond to the survey.